This is the second video in a series showing how to set up, configure, test, and debug MVSP on D3 and MVBase. In this video, we'll cover MVSP configuration, testing, and patching. The next video will cover debugging MVSP. Let's look at the MVSP maintenance menu. As previously mentioned, you can get here by entering M at TCL in the MVSP account. Options 1, 2, and 5 deal with starting, stopping, and checking status of the MVSP Telnet listener. Pretty easy stuff, so let's concentrate on number 4. The most common configuration of MVSP deals with enabling users and accounts to use MVSP. Let's talk about users first. For MVBase, which does not have D3's concept of a user's file, the user information created here is stored in MVSP itself, and the user-oriented content discussed here is largely D3 specific. To enable a user, all that MVSP does is put a capital Y in attribute 10 of the user's file item for that user. By default, the only D3 user that's enabled is the MVSP user. It's a bad idea to use the MVSP user for your application needs, so pick a few others and enable them. In my opinion, enabling the DM user is also a bad idea, since this user is administrative and hopefully passworded, and you don't want to hand out that password to anybody using the API or toolkit. In my experience, it's a good idea to create a special user or users whose only purpose is for use with the toolkit or the APIs. If for no other reason, then it's easier to find out what PIBs are using MVSP by simply doing a list U. One very important thing to note is that for MVSP-enabled users, attribute 10 should contain an uppercase Y and only an uppercase Y. If attribute 10 contains anything, you need to remove it before using the menu to enable a user. MVSP versions 1.8.18 and higher will throw an error 24 if attribute 10 is not empty before enabling. Versions 1.8.17 and earlier will not throw the error and simply append the Y to the end of what's already in attribute 10. The problem is that MVSP will now not see that user as enabled, so make sure attribute 10 is empty before you enable the user. Enabling accounts is the other frequent configuration activity. When you enable an account, MVSP flags that account as enabled and updates the MD of that account with the bunch of MVSP BP programs that need to be cataloged in that account in order to run a request in that account. It also sets up queue pointers to MVSP account files that must be available in the account you're enabling. You'll notice that the user and account maintenance screens have the same basic options. List the enabled entities, enable an entity, and disable an entity. When you select to enable or disable, you are asked for the user or account, and MVSP does the rest. This slide shows the list of MVSP config menu errors to which I referred in the previous slide. Please take a minute, hit pause, and familiarize yourself with this list. Okay, now that you've got MVSP set up, configured, and listening, let's test it. The easiest way to do that is to telnet to D3 on TCP port 9000. If you get the prompt shown in the slide, it's working. If you don't, it's time to debug. We'll go into that later. First, let's talk about patching MVSP. First, we need to discuss the latest patch levels on the various versions of D3 and MVBase. MVSP was introduced in D3 version 9.0, and the initial MVSP version was 1.0.24 or something like that. The highest MVSP patch level for D3 9.0 and MVBase 3.x is 1.7.3. The D3 License Manager was introduced in D3 9.1. This also affected MVSP, so the minimum MVSP for D3 versions 9.1 through 10.2 is 1.8.0. The current patch level is 1.8.17. The License Manager interaction is the reason D3 9.0 and MVBase cannot use MVSP 1.8 and above, and D3 9.1 and above cannot use MVSP 1.7. When D3 10.3 hit the street, there were some changes that MVSP needed to play ball, so we introduced version 1.8.18. This only works on D3 10.3 and later. D3 10.2 cannot use MVSP 1.8.18, and D3 10.3 cannot use MVSP 1.8.17. So the slide shows the D3 versions and the corresponding MVSP patch pseudotapes that you can download from RCP or get from support. So let's patch MVSP. In the example, we'll patch D3 10.2 to MVSP version 1.8.17. The steps are simple. Get the patch tape from RCP and put it on your D3 server somewhere. Log to the MVSP account. Devmake to add the tape device. Actually, the example is D3 Windows. To patch on D3 Unix, use change device instead using type equals floppy and density equals sudo. Set device to that newly added tape device. T-rewind to make sure that you're at the beginning. T-load the patch scripts to the MD. Enter patch at TCL. Enter Y to confirm that you want to load the patch. The system will now patch. When it's done, you'll be logged off. Log back onto the MVSP account and enter patch.mvsp.2 to finish the process of updating all the MVSP enabled accounts. In the next video, we'll talk about debugging MVSP. If you have any questions about any of the content we've covered so far, please contact Rocket D3 Support.